Sunday morning rain is falling. Let's go.
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. Not my king. Oh, buddy, we have so much to talk about today. That was protesters there in the UK who were not happy about King Charles finally receiving his crown. So welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sundays. And welcome. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. We have some interesting things to discuss today, so I can't wait to get into it. I want to go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat, and then we'll dive right in. What's going on? Ashura says Sabby, King Charles looks like a gender swap version of the late Queen Elizabeth that Disney and the MCU might want to introduce. Oh, dear. Oh, man. What's going on? Steve says, do the 5, smash like, do the 5. Yes, smash that like button. That helps me out with the algorithm. What's going on? Hannah G says, Charles, LOL. We're going to have some fun today. And you're going to learn a little bit too. Shout out to CBC Voter says, happy Sunday, Sabby. Greetings, Rick says, hey, y'all. What's going on? Oz the Boomer says, nice voice at Sabby Sabs. Thank you so much. I hope you guys like that little Maroon 5 kick there. Greetings, Dr. Nick says, hi, everybody. Shout out to Kill Your Grogers. Hello, RBN family. What's going on, JR Jr.? Sabby, did you write, perform the instrumental for your theme song? I did not. That is actually produced by Jesse Jett. He's a part of Indie News Network. That is my voice that you hear. He took a sound bite of my voice during another live stream where at some point I said doobie doobie doo when he mashed all that together and created that song for me. So yeah, shout out to Jesse Jett. That's all him. I do not have producing talents. What's going on? Eric T. Red, who's a Sabby member, says, hey there, lefty friends. It's a sunny Sunday here. Yes, the weather is so nice today here in Massachusetts. So we are finally getting a break from the cold weather. What's going on? Steven says, happy Sunday all and cheers. Greetings, Dana says, hey there, everybody. What's going on? Venti Cafe. Hello, peeps. Happy Sunday. Shout out to William says Sabby theme song makes me smile. That is good news. I'm glad. Greetings, Janine says Sunday morning, the only Maroon 5 song I ever liked. Happy Sunday, everyone. Wow. Wow, I'm surprised by that, Deneen. My favorite Maroon 5 songs are from their first CD, Songs About Jane. Those are my favorite songs by them. Their style kind of changed after that and they became more popish, in my opinion. What's going on, Corey? Who's a Sabby member, says Sabby Sunday, let's go. Shout out to Snork, who's also a Sabby member, says we know which street had the people who weren't invited. Oh, shout out to Buns. What kind of buns? My American dream to see the monarchy fall. We're going to get into this today. Shout out to Pachico, who's a Sabby member, says, yay, Sabby. And shout out to Kinky. Happy Sunday, everyone. Greetings, Gyro says it always feels hypocritical to criticize other forms of government for their corruption and evilness. Yet, pretend that our preferred forms of government are somehow incorruptible. Shout out to P. Smith. I saw a great video of people singing, you can shove your coronation up your arse. Up your arse. You can shove your coronation up your arse to the tune of if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Yes, yes. Things got lit the other day in the UK. And shout out to El Coyote, who says the monarchy is evil. Greetings. Jonathan says, hey, Sabby. What's up, Joe? Says, good afternoon, everyone. And shout out to Mastermind Hour, says, hello, fams. Just got home from the dispensary. Greetings, Sherry says, happy Sunday, everyone. Sherry's also a Sabby member. And shout out to Saul, says, Sabby, thank you for making my boring, rainy Sunday. Yeah, we had rain for the past couple of days here as well, like off and on. So it's nice to have like a sunny day. But let's go ahead and give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really do appreciate it. And I hope you like my new little design here by Eric. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, don't forget the members. Thank you guys so much. Really do appreciate all of your help. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let's get into it. So much to discuss. Let's go ahead and show that beautiful thumbnail there and let you see what stories we're going to discuss today, because it's going to be an interesting Sunday, but I think you will learn a bit. Tonight, we are discussing King Charles' coronation uproar. Yikes. He looks very telling there. There he is with his crown. And there's a little clown face emoji next to him. We'll get into that. We're also going to discuss Joe Rogan DNC anger. What did Joe Rogan say about the DNC and why is it all the buzz? And we're also going to discuss the Russia-Ukraine war hurts Africa. How many of you know about that? And why is it hurting Africa? We're going to get into that discussion. And last but not least, we're going to discuss New Mexico ballot measure wins. We are almost through all of the states, guys, that had those measures. We're getting there. We're getting there. So yesterday, King Charles was officially crowned in the UK. This celebration is called the Coronation. So Queen Elizabeth had this. So, of course, King Charles is having this. I want to show you a few highlights from the coronation. And then I also want to discuss, there's a split here. There is a divide in reference to the monarchy. And it is among the citizens of the UK. Some people relished in King Charles' coronation celebration. And then there are others who are not pleased about this. And they have opinions and criticisms of the monarchy that I think we all need to hear. But let's dive into those highlights first, just to give you a little tidbit, a little preview of what happened yesterday. And here you'll see, here is King Charles and Camilla. Man, what a spectacle. I can't even show you all of the jokes that people made on social media yesterday about Camilla, so we're not even going to get into all of that. But basically, long story short, people were saying, oh, look, even the side chick can be crowned. And I do want to say really quickly, because I don't think everyone is aware of this, Camilla was actually dating Charles first. A lot of people don't know this. They think that he was dating Diana first. That is not true. He was with her first. He wanted to marry her, and the queen forbid it. And that is how he ended up with Diana. So he didn't actually want to marry her. This is just something to know. It was forbidden. Why? Because of her reputation. So let's go ahead and get into the highlights. So there were over 2,000 guests. I'm going to mute this part because there's a little bit of music coming up. There were over 2,000 guests, including heads of state, religious leaders, and family friends. Prince Harry walked in the Abbey just behind his uncle, Prince Andrew. And we're going to get into Prince Andrew as well. So there's Prince Harry, yada, yada. And everybody's walking in and all of that jazz. Westminster Abbey has been the site of the British coronation since 1066. Charles is the 40th monarch to be crowned there and the 10th since the 1776 U.S. Declaration of Independence. So, and here's King Charles walking down the aisle here. Now, this whole thing to me yesterday just seemed really cringe. This type of admiration and celebration over one person who actually, this isn't something that they fought to achieve. They were just given this opportunity by birth because they were born into a royal family. And we're going to talk about that as well. Like, what are the limitations here? Should the monarchy continue? And we need to also talk about the wealth that the royal family has and where that wealth came from. So we're going to do a little bit of history here as well today. So you can see here is where they are crowning him. They are also giving him the scepters. And if you go back to video footage of Queen Elizabeth during her coronation, similar process here. So he's going to give his little speech here. So now I can unmute it.
I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you, and faith and truth I will bear unto you, as your liege man of life and limb.
This is so cringe to me. The kneeling, the bowing down. It's just, and I get it. It's a part of the culture, but I mean, it's his dad. So to me, it's just, this is so over the top to me. And this is one of the reasons why I think that the monarchy just needs to be abolished, because I don't feel like this is relevant in 2023. This idea of these royal families, the bowing, the kneeling, I just don't feel like that fits anymore in the society that we're in.
So help me God.
It's very odd. This is just weird to me. And it also seemed kind of awkward. So there's Camilla. So she is.
May thy servant Camilla, who wears this crown, be filled by thine abundant grace.
So this part here, I'm just going to mute and we can skip through the song. See that part. And so here you'll see, this is where he's starting to do his walk. I just couldn't get through this without laughing. Like, seriously, yesterday I was watching some of the video footage on Twitter because I didn't want to sit down and actually watch this on national television. But it was laughable to me. Like, I just don't. So there he is walking through. Why does Camilla get a crown? Because she's married to, they crown both of them. This is the king and the queen. So she's with Charles. So actually, I don't know if they're actually married yet, but she is with Charles. So that's how it works. And they're walking him out and they're singing there as he walks out. This all to me is just awkward and weird. He doesn't look comfortable. And then you'll see here's the exit. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, look at all of that stolen wealth. We'll get into that. All of that stolen wealth. And you get the idea. So we don't have to play the whole thing, but that was some of the highlights there from the coronation yesterday. Now, there were protesters that were at this event, and honestly, I don't blame them. They were chanting, "Not my king." And I showed a clip of this at the very beginning of the show. But you have to understand that people in the UK are divided over, now King Charles being crowned. You still have to remember that inflation is still rampant. There's a cost of living crisis in the UK. And so the people there are divided. And then there's also a generational divide that we need to talk about as well. Some of the younger people don't see the point of this anymore. You have to understand that they don't make laws. There is a prime minister in the UK. That's what the prime minister is for. There's a parliament. There's a prime minister. So for a lot of the younger people, they just don't understand the point of this. And they find themselves asking, like, why do we still have a monarchy during a time where people are struggling to pay their bills? There's a cost of living crisis in the UK, and our tax dollars are supporting their way of life. Because remember, during the winter, when residents in the UK couldn't afford to pay their heating bills, what you have to understand is they set up facilities called warm banks so people could go to those facilities to get heat. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace had heat. Buckingham Palace still had servants and maids and butlers. Their way of life did not change. And is that fair? Is it fair for the royal family to continue to live a lavish lifestyle during a time when the people in the UK are struggling financially because there is a cost of living crisis? And that is the question that some people have. So I want to go to this clip here where they discuss just that, the division among the residents in the UK. Listen to this.
With his country in the middle of a cost of living crisis, King Charles has promised a slimmed-down coronation. There will be a shorter ceremony and fewer guests, but the cost will remain high, and the official figure remains a secret.
The coronation has been estimated to be costing between 50 and 100 million.
The coronation has been estimated costing between 50 and 100 million dollars. Is it necessary for them to continue this? Think about what that money could be put towards, right? There are homeless people in the UK. Why not take that 50 or 100 million dollars and try to start to eradicate homelessness in the UK instead? Why can't Charles and Camilla and all the rest of them just get jobs like everyone else in the UK? Why should they get to continue to live this life of luxury off of stolen wealth from other countries, other nations? Why? Let's go on. That's insane.
At the moment, that's just a guess. We don't know exactly how much it's going to cost.
Not my king! Not my king! Not my king! And it's this use of public money and the secrecy around it that's got some of the king's subjects thinking revolutionary thoughts. Not my king! Not my king!
We do not need a coronation. The Swedish king decided the coronations were out of date, and that was in 1870. So, we are wasting huge amounts of money at a time when we have a cost of living crisis, when we can't afford enough police, can't afford enough nurses, can't afford enough teachers, and it is a disgrace.
But we can afford to pay for this ridiculous celebration for King Charles. And he is 100% spot on there.
think the king, the current king and the royal family as such do make a massive contribution to this country. How many people actually come to London and love this place and the money they spend here? Yeah, we should be really thankful to the royal family.
Morecambe in Lancashire is one of the places that's been hardest hit by the cost of living crisis.
Morecambe is kind of boom and bust town. The cost of living crisis is getting more and more obvious in the way people present, in how people behave, and the kind of lives that they're leading. We've got the lowest life expectancy in the Northwest. Can't use the electric, can't get on the phone, can't book a doctor's appointment.
Chris Kravietz has set up a food pantry in his local church to help the community.
They have to set up food pantries, but yet the king and the queen, like all these people, Andrew, Harry, even though he lives in the US, he still comes back to participate in these activities. William, Kate, all of them get to live in wealth. And you have people in the UK that have to rely on food pantries just so they can eat. This is a problem. A massive redistribution of wealth in the UK is needed at this point in time. And I don't care if it was tradition. Some traditions need to go away. And it's okay for that to happen. You don't have to continue something just because it is tradition. At this point in time, you need to ask yourself, what is the point of continuing to have a monarchy in the UK at this point in time? I can't think of one.
I found that using the pantry has been like a lifesaver, really.
Even small business owners like Lauren Woodfine are struggling.
Our energy bills have gone up like ridiculous amounts, like almost triple. So we've been using hot water bottles to keep our clients warm. I think loads of people are struggling.
Lauren thinks the coronation is a waste of money.
In a time where we can't feed and house our people, I don't really agree on the fact that they're spending so much money for a family that's so wealthy. It's just becoming a king. Like, it's just put your hat on, isn't it?
Yep.
Oh, yay! Oh, yay!
But Morecambe also has its fair share of monarchists.
God save the king! We're trying to break the Guinness Book of Records for the biggest street party. It'll be a huge turnout, a huge celebration. So what are you guys doing on the Sunday? Are you working?
Yes, we'll be here working. Helping out.
Now, these are the ones who still agree with the monarchy and still want the monarchy to stay. And it's just like there are some people who do live for this. There are some people who they love the royal family. But, you know, at what point? At what point? And I feel like, particularly our society, it's like we have to have someone to celebritize. You have to have someone to idolize, to look towards. And so for some people in the UK, the royal family is that image, and they want them to maintain having the monarchy because of that. But for what? How does this help you? How does this benefit you in what way, shape, or form? How? Just so you can have someone to fawn over? Never understood this.
Cost of living is absolutely dreadful for everybody. But I just think this is a huge historical event. Possibly a lot of us will never see this ever happen again. I think what it will bring to the country outweighs the cost.
He just told you what it will bring to the country outweighs the cost. What is it bringing to the country? What is it bringing to the country if people are struggling to buy food? What does it bring to the country if people are struggling to pay their bills? You have a cost of living crisis. And you really believe that this celebration of putting a crown on a man's head, who, by the way, didn't like work for it, so to speak, it was just handed down to him because he was born into it. You really believe that this outweighs the cost of people struggling to pay for food, people struggling to pay their bills. That does not make any sense. This is part of the celebrity culture of the royal family. Now, as I mentioned, there were protesters there at the event, and they're not sorry. They are not sorry for what they have said at this coronation. Listen to this.
Why should we arrange our entire constitution just because American tourists like to have a selfie outside Buckingham Palace?
We haven't ruined anybody's day. We've just been quietly here. We've just been having a lovely, quiet sort of gathering here. We've done our chants. They've tried to do a few chants. I think it's all part of the fun. If you think about it, it's a proper British day out, you know, with a bit of banter.
I think this coronation is a disgusting waste of an estimated £250 million. The royal family sits at the top of a pyramid of inequality in this country. There's classism and snobbery in this country, and it's because of them.
She said they sit at the top of the pyramid. How is this any different from the billionaires and other oligarchs that we have? It isn't really. Remember, this whole idea of trickle-down economics was proven incorrect. It does not work. Ronald Reagan tried to get people to believe that. People did believe it, but we found out it doesn't work. So what you have ideally are people sitting at the top of that pyramid, some because they had a business and their business got them there. But when it comes to the royal family, their business didn't get them there. They are there, number one, because they stole wealth from other nations. And then everyone else that came after that was just born into the family. So they just get this handed to them. There needs to be a call, seriously, for those of you that live in the UK, of a massive redistribution of wealth in reference to the monarchy. It is not fair that you have one person, one family sitting at the top of the pyramid and everybody else is at the bottom, literally at the bottom. And it is the people at the bottom, it's their taxpayer dollars that are supporting and that are holding that family up at the top of that pyramid. Without those people, without the residents in the UK, you don't have the tax dollars to support the family. This is a reality of the situation. And what are they getting out of it? Nothing.
Very, very top.
I'm here to exercise my democratic right, and since I'm paying approximately £5 for this coronation today, I feel I've got just as much right to come here as the royalists who have paid their £5.
I don't think that it does the country a great service. I don't think he is hard-working. I don't think that it's a good way that the country gets reflected around the world. I don't believe in people who aren't elected having positions of power, especially privileged people.
I believe in democracy, and monarchy is by its very nature undemocratic.
It is very undemocratic. Remember, they're not elected. He brought up a really good point here, right? The prime minister is elected. The king or the queen is not elected. They are just there just because they were born into it. And just because they were born into the family, they get to live this bougie lifestyle just because. Just because. Off of the backs of the working class people in the UK. How is that still fair? At this day in time, in 2023, make it make sense. Now, some people will say they need to be there because of tourism. I say find something else in London to go look at. If the only reason you're keeping them there is because it helps tourism, then that says something to me. You mean to tell me there's nothing else that people in London can go visit? I beg to differ. London has history. The UK has history that goes beyond the royal family. But if that is the response, that's the reason as to why they keep them there, that is very, very sad. Very sad.
I believe in equality, and inequality is a huge problem in this country at the moment, and they epitomise inequality.
We're told the idea that everybody loves the royal family and that we all sort of enjoy the feudalistic aspect of bowing down to people, and it's just so not true. Most people are indifferent, and a few of us actually feel it's important to come out and say, right, I'm against the monarchy. As people, it's nothing to do with them them personally. The whole idea that we've got this institution that corrupts the whole country. If you look at it carefully, we've got a system of landed gentry clawing in wealth after wealth. The Duke of Westminster, you know, $9 billion a year, and they pay no tax on it. It's just an unfair society, and this is just the pinnacle of it. So
they pay no taxes on it. No taxes on the land. None of it. None of it. I like the fact that she explained to people that, I guess more so people that don't live in the UK, have this impression that everybody in the UK just loves the royal family. Notice she told you that's not true. And people came out in the rain. The protesters, they're out in the rain. And also the people who came to cheer them on are out in the rain. A passionate issue for people.
So what we need to do is to challenge that narrative that it's okay to have dukes and lords that we're supposed to bow down to, that are creaming in the wealth. They don't have to go to food banks. They go to food banks for photo opportunities. People in this country are going to food banks because they can't afford to eat.
What are your thoughts on the people out protesting?
That part right there. They go to food banks. You see the royal family, they go to like these charity events. They go to like food banks. They go to visit orphanages. They take pictures. They give a little speech, and then they go right back to Buckingham Palace to their life that remains the same. Whereas the people who actually need the food and need those services living in the UK, they don't get to go back to a palace. They rely on those food pantries. For them, that's their life. That's their everyday life. So they're not apologizing for it at all, and I don't blame them.
Here. I just think to see these people out today is a real shame because, you know, the amount the monarchy do, the amount of tourism, capital they bring in for the country, to see these people showing such, you know, the press against the monarchy, really, it's not good to see.
You see what I just told you? That's the only reason they think they should be there is because of the tourism. He just proved my point. The amount of tourism that they bring into the country. That's sad. That's sad. You know how many countries don't have a king or a queen or royal family? And they get plenty of tourism. So he just wants to keep them around. Look at the amount of capital that they bring into the country. It's all about money. Also, the same amount of capital, all that capital that's brought into the country, and you still have people starving there? Where's that money going? That's all it's about. You see, the focus is just right back onto money. All the money that they bring in, how dare these people? How dare them? Now, some of the protesters were arrested, as you can imagine. This one here, Patrick Thelwell, he was arrested. Today, I was arrested at the Coronation on suspicion of carrying eggs. I was identified by a facial recognition camera and snatched from the protest in handcuffs so tightly they cut my skin. For the second time, I was dragged through a crowd of monarchists baying for my blood. Listen to this.
This fascism! I'm arrested just for being here!
That happened. So he was one of the people that was arrested. There were others, but his was actually caught on camera. He also came back and gave us an update and said I was searched, and when they found nothing, was released after half an hour. The police had to escort me back through the monarchist crowds because so many people were assaulting me. So there was a firefight. Now, I want you to see this clip here as well, because this was right before the protest happened. And this is some of the people who were getting ready for it and explaining like why they decided to come out to do this.
Down with the monarchy. A federal republic is what we need.
As Britain prepares for its first coronation since 1953.
A new monarch, a different flag. Britain is buzzing with all things coronation.
The state of the monarchy has come into renewed focus. With this focus, an opportunity. for Republicans to convert more people to their constitutional cause.
Hello, would you vote for Charles? Would you vote for Charles?
Pollsters point to a growing generational divide, with young people increasingly likely to harbour Republican views.
Just nobody needs these people, and we're literally burning money that we don't have and can't afford to throw away.
Nobody needs these people. They're not needed. Burning money that we can't afford to throw away. Now, there was another thing that stood out to me because, you know, Andrew was there. He was present, of course. And someone pointed something out, and I think this is very important to mention. This is from Vision for the Blind. Prince Andrew sexually abused underage girls, was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, yet here he is in full regalia at his brother's coronation. These people are truly sick. And this is the other part of the problem. No accountability for the royal family. The fact that Prince Andrew was even allowed to be there in full regalia, it should give you pause. The fact that Prince Andrew is not behind bars right now, but the protester who was just in the crowd saying, "Not my king," was arrested, that should give you pause. This is another problem with these types of institutions because they have so much power, because they have so much wealth that, again, that they stole, they are not held accountable. They should be ashamed, should be ashamed. But how did this even come to be? How is it that the royal family were able to obtain as much wealth as they have now anyway? Because as you can imagine, it wasn't theirs. Let's get into a little bit of the history. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and hit that like button, guys. That helps me with the algo. But we need to get into this. We need to talk about the history of the royal family and how they stole wealth from other nations. Listen to this.
From the 16th century onwards, the British monarchy was central to the establishment, expansion, and maintenance of the British Empire, the largest the world has ever seen. One of the ways they amassed wealth and power was through the transatlantic slave trade.
Bingo. Bingo. And a lot of people, they don't like to talk about it. Some people don't want to hear about this, but this is the fact. This is not my opinion. This is not what I want to be true. This is the fact if you follow the history. It wasn't theirs. Let's go on.
Of which the royals were largely in favor. The 1562 journey of John Hawkins, the first English person known to have included enslaved Africans in his cargo, was approved by Queen Elizabeth I herself. After Britain invaded Jamaica in 1655, the Royal African Company was set up by royal charter under King Charles II. Its purpose was to control the West African slave trade and protect the British monopoly against the Dutch. The RAC went on to transport more enslaved Africans to the Americas than any other single institution ever, lining the pockets of the Stuart monarchs.
That piece right there is incredibly crucial for people to understand when you compare them to other nations.
To protect the British monopoly against the Dutch. The RAC went on to transport more enslaved Africans to the Americas than any other single institution ever.
More than any other single institution ever.
Lining the pockets of the Stuart monarchs. Many of those trafficked were branded with the initials DY, as in the Duke of York, who led the company and later became King James II. Britain's shameful history of slavery is inextricable from the royals who were so eager to profit from it, and that barbaric legacy extends today. Historic royal residences like Kensington Palace and Hampton Court Palace that date back to the 17th century were, to some extent, funded by slavery.
There you go. Even their residences, it dates all the way back. So for people who think, oh, well, those properties didn't exist during that time. Yes, they did. And this is why some other countries have called on the royal family to pay their country reparations for this. Let's go on.
So while it's hard to tell just how much of the Windsors' wealth derives from slavery today, it quite literally helped to build the roofs over their heads. And these days, it's the British taxpayers who are footing the maintenance bill. In 2014, they paid $7.6 million to refurbish a 20-room apartment for Will and Kate in Kensington Palace.
Will and Kate's apartment, $7.6 million just to refurbish it. The physical structure already existed, but to refurbish it, $7.6 million, that money came from taxpayers, the same taxpayers who were struggling to pay for food. How is that okay? That's not. Will and Kate can get jobs. They can do that. Some people don't want to hear this because they like the royal family. Bump that. Will and Kate can go get jobs and be like everybody else in the UK.
During Queen Victoria's reign, the Slavery Compensation Act meant a £20 million payout. £17 billion in today's money was paid out to slave owners, not the people who had been enslaved or the countries they were taken from.
Bingo. When they did do payouts, that money went to slave owners, not to slaves or to the countries the slaves were taken from. Everybody needs to know this. Share this with your friends, especially those that are, obsessed and that love the royal family.
It represented at the time 40% of the Treasury's annual spending budget. The sum was so large that it took British taxpayers 182 years to pay off.
In recent years, more and more former colonies are saying they want out of the Commonwealth and an apology. And while they're at it, their rightful share of those billions, maybe even trillions, is complex to calculate, but some estimated figures for reparations suggest that the UK owes a staggering amount of money, around $10 trillion to the Caribbean and to Africa each. And
each. Trillion, not million or billion.
$44.6 trillion to India. It's enough to make you sweat, unless, of course, you're Prince Andrew.
There you go.
Ahead of the couple touching down here, there have been protests which have cast a distinct shadow over this.
This is when Kate and William, they went to visit, I believe it was either Barbados or the Bahamas, and they were greeted with residents there saying, yeah, your family needs to pay us back. Trillions of dollars. And I'm glad she mentioned India too, because a lot of times people will forget that, but also they took wealth from India as well.
Visit.
Earlier this year, Will and Kate were embarrassed on their tour of the Caribbean, and not just because of Will's bad dancing. Before their arrival in Jamaica, over 100 public figures signed an open letter calling on the royal family and the British government to offer an apology and pay reparations. Prince William did express profound sorrow for the appalling atrocities of slavery.
But Prince William didn't cut any checks. And this is another thing too. In reference to Jamaica, a lot of people say, well, Jamaica is a poor country. Maybe it would not have been if their wealth wasn't stolen from them. Will can say he's sorry, but I don't see any checks.
But that's not actually an apology or a payout.
Prince William, I hope you feel ashamed in some sense.
They represent a certain kind of history that is unpleasant for our people.
Yep. So you can see why so many people around the world view the Queen's death as an opportunity to right historic wrongs. What remains to be seen is whether the new king will be open to reparations, but it's unlikely they'll come at a cost to him and his family.
Which means most likely no, because that would mean that they would have to change their lifestyle. That's just the reality of it. And they are very comfortable, very comfortable. Now, JB tweeted this, and I thought this was important. Trying to take down the system that perpetuated imperialism and colonialism seems more noble to me than some dude in a crown who is king just because his mommy was queen, just because her daddy was king, just because. And that's how it works. Will there be a change? Do you think there will be any type of change in the future? We'll have to wait and see. I'll go ahead and take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Reaganomics trickle-down theory was based on the assumption that if you give the financial benefits to the boss class, then they will be so gracious to give it to their workers. That, of course, they underestimated the greed of the boss class. Also, if they want tourism to continue and they want to have a kingdom, then call Disney. They give you a magic kingdom, tourism maintained, problem solved. I love that. I love that. Love it, love it, love it. JR Jr. Sabby, did you write? Oh, I did that one. Sorry. Danny, Camilla was the first main squeeze. Yes. He was with Camilla first. A lot of people don't realize this. But Charles was dating her first, and the queen said he could not marry her because of her reputation. That's right. So a lot of people just see her. They're like, she's the side chick, but that was his girlfriend. That was the person he wanted to marry. This isn't the first time this has happened in their family. It's happened a couple of times where people of the royal family wanted to marry someone they were actually in love with, and the queen stepped in and said no. She also said this to her own sister, Margaret. She wouldn't allow Margaret to marry the guy she was in love with because he was divorced. Apparently that was a no-no back then. And here we are. But let's get to the next story, because this one's really interesting as well. In reference to this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, you know, we've talked about how some of the European countries have been affected in reference to the inflation because of the Nord Stream pipeline. So we talked about the UK, we've talked about Germany, we've talked about France as well. People are still protesting in France. But now we're going to talk about how this war is actually hurting countries in Africa, even though Africa didn't even take a side. So you have to remember that they decided to remain neutral in reference to this conflict with Russia and Ukraine. But just because they decided to remain neutral doesn't mean that they're not hurting. I want to go to this clip here. I think this is really important for people to see, and then we'll get into a couple other specifics as well. Can the war in Ukraine cause a famine in Africa? Everyone needs to hear this.
Landmass. But the reality, Visual Politic viewers, is that the war has turned the world upside down. We've already told you in a lot of videos how it has caused chaos in the energy markets. However, that's not the only consequence. The war in Ukraine is also putting another very important market, the agricultural market, on the ropes. Think about it. It is very difficult to live without oil, without gas, or with the price of these hydrocarbons skyrocketing. But living without wheat or corn is not easy either. In fact, for millions and millions of people, the lack of these foods could mean the difference between eating or going hungry. And you'll probably say, okay, but what do Russia and Ukraine have to do with all of this? Well, more than you might think. Basically because we are talking about two of the largest agricultural producers in the world. I'm sure many of you who are watching us from Europe, from the United States, or even from Latin America have noticed that food prices have gone up a lot during the last year. Well, you already know what one of the main reasons is. It certainly has been tough, but fortunately, in general, in most parts of the world, we are not starving. However, there is one part of the world where the same cannot be said: Sub-Saharan Africa. We have told you many times here on Visual Politic how in the world, and particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, so much progress has been made in recent years that, for many people, famines were doomed to be nothing more than bad chapters in the history books.
So they were actually at the point in Sub-Saharan Africa where they would not even have to revisit famine again. They had gotten past that point. But then there was a war.
Indeed, famine did seem to be on the road to extinction. The Russian and Ukrainian agricultural sectors have been key players in this. To give you an idea, Ukraine produces enough food for 400 million people every year, many of them in Sub-Saharan Africa. But now the war has complicated everything. Grain exports from Ukraine and Russia are no longer as large and frequent as they were before Putin launched his troops on his neighboring country. And naturally, this has caused tensions in agricultural markets to skyrocket.
So he's talking about grain, he's talking about wheat. Remember a while back, I told you about the food shortage that was in North Korea. They were also impacted by the war between Russia and Ukraine because they actually depended on fertilizer from Russia. So that affected them. Again, like even countries that may not be involved, maybe did not take a side in reference to this conflict at all, that still doesn't mean they're not affected. because they were depending on, products from Russia in particular or Ukraine in order to feed their people.
Not just because Ukrainian Black Sea ports are constantly targeted by Russia or because fighting has limited Ukraine's production, but because even sanctions on Russia now make its exports much more difficult and more expensive. The result? The likelihood of an uncontrolled food crisis has not been this high since the 1980s. So the question is, what initiatives are being promoted to avoid a catastrophic famine? Why were Russia and Ukraine selling so much wheat to Africa? And two other questions that may surprise you even more. What is Turkey's role of all of this in the story? Could Turkey succeed in preventing a worldwide famine? Today we're going to answer all of these questions, but first, you know what's coming. Let's look at some history.
We're just going to fast forward a little bit here because he goes through some stuff that we've already talked about. It's the history, yada, 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 yada. This part right here, agriculture, I want you to see. Proportion of people working in agriculture.
Increasing. However, wait a moment, because not all of the process was quite so successful. Sub-Saharan Africa was the only region of the world that could not successfully join the Green Revolution. Why? Well, actually, for several reasons. The first, and perhaps most important, is that while the rest of the countries were already independent during the Green Revolution, many of the sub-Saharan African countries were still struggling to free themselves. And when they succeeded, internal power struggles and corrupt governments began to flourish, making it virtually impossible to develop infrastructure projects that would allow production to be increased and then transported from one place to another. Of course, investment in agricultural development needs sufficient infrastructure to be able to quickly export their production. That's not all though. For example, this same lack of infrastructure is also one of the reasons why fertilizer use is so low in the region, because transportation costs are much higher. And if we...
Which means they would have to have fertilizer brought in. They would have to have the exports for the... So see, that's the thing. If you're depending on one of these countries for fertilizer, like Russia or Ukraine, and right now, because there is this conflict and the sanctions that were put on Russia by the US government, like I told you a while back, that wasn't just going to impact Russia. That was also going to hurt other countries as well that depend on those products from Russia in order to grow food. And here we are.
Add to all this the extreme climatic conditions in many areas of sub-Saharan Africa, then we have the perfect cocktail to explain the underdevelopment of the sector in the region. This is precisely what explains, to a large extent, why subsistence agriculture is still the order of the day here, and why many of the countries in the region have to import so much food. And as the population keeps growing, then the problem is clear. The demand for food imports is increasing. And of course, faced with such a scenario, the Ukrainian war has set that ticking time bomb off. Visual Politic viewers, this is precisely the #1 reason why the Ukrainian war has become such a huge nightmare for the forgotten continent.
Notice that he refers to Africa as the forgotten continent. It's pretty sad if you think about it. I don't think it should be forgotten, but for some reason it tends to escape people's minds. But it's very important, and we're going to get into something else here as well in reference to Africa with this war between Russia and Ukraine, about what he just said there about it being the forgotten continent. So hold on to that thought, because we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Check this out.
The music, he's got to do something with that.
Famine.
Yeah, I don't like the music is killing me. But the other part I wanted to get to was this piece right about, it's towards the end. Here, where he talks about the corn prices. Yeah.
Wheat and corn prices have been falling since the initiative was signed. However, there have been moments of great uncertainty because at times Russia has given the impression that it wants to break this agreement. This has caused prices to rebound every now and then. And the fact is that Moscow is playing with this initiative. They are trying to use it to get some sanctions eased. For example, when Putin signed his participation in July 2022, he did so for 4 months. And in November, when he renewed it, he did the same. Just recently, on the 18th of March this year, when he had to renew it, he did so for only 60 days. Why? Because he wants to tighten the screws on Western countries. And not only that, Russia wants to exploit this position intensively. Just look at this.
If we finally...
I don't even know if I would say exploit the position, but this is a speech here. I'll get into it in just a second. If you are that country and you have sanctions put on you, why would you not try to find a way to get those sanctions eased, right? But listen to what he says here. Listen to this. If we finally decide not to extend the agreement within 60 days, we are ready to supply from Russia free of charge to these countries all the volume sent during the last time to the African countries in special need. Now, this is March of this year.
Decide not to extend this agreement within 60 days, we are ready to supply from Russia free of charge to these countries all the volume sent during the last time to the African countries in special need. V. Putin, March 2023.
We can't be sure that this is going to be the case until Russia decides to withdraw from the initiative, if it does pull out. But giving something away for free, I don't know, that doesn't seem very Russian to me. They always want something in return.
So and we're going to stop it here because, of course, I think you guys understand what he's trying to get into there. But he's basically trying to make it seem like, oh, no, they would definitely never do that. We don't know. We don't know until it happens. But the point that he made there about Africa actually hurting because of this war with Russia and Ukraine is spot on. Yes, there are food issues, and it really sucks because they did not take a side in reference to this conflict, and they're still being impacted, even when they were being bullied to take a side. Now, I want to show you a clip in reference to this as well. Let me pull this up here. It says, if Africans have learned anything from the removal of Russia from the SWIFT community, then it ought to be evident that, 1, our banks need to transact without any foreign intermediaries, and 2, trade in Africa should not rely on foreign currencies. This is especially crucial right now during the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, because as you see this issue with famine, if it were to the point where African countries would not have to depend on these allies or other countries in order to feed their people or in order to take care of their people, then they can break away from that and break that chain. But as it stands right now, they were depending on fertilizer and other products from Russia. And now they're having difficulty getting it. So what he is encouraging African people to do right now is that they need to find a way to fully break away from that foreign dependence, to not depend on those other countries and to be able to have those things themselves. Listen to what he says.
Look at the entire banking sector and the entire banking ecosystem.
He's talking about the banking sector.
If you want to move money, it is SWIFT. I think SWIFT is incorporated in Switzerland, little Switzerland. If I want to move money from South Africa to Nairobi, the Federal Bank of South Africa will ask many questions, and then I'll provide a SWIFT number. Then the intermediary bank will be in New York, not in Mozambique, in New York. If it is going to Europe, it is IBAN. We are not in control.
He said, we are not in control. And they're not. Let me let him finish here.
I listened to the panel, and I respect all of them. They are talking about clouds. Whose clouds? Whose clouds? They are talking about digitization. Whose digitization?
Not theirs. This is important, guys. Not theirs.
They are talking about cryptocurrency. Whose cryptocurrency?
There you go.
You can be switched off in the twinkling of an eye and you are back in the dark ages. That is the reality. There's a saying in my mother tongue. When you are milking a borrowed cow, you must always look towards the gate because the owner may come at any time. And I'm saying that Africa is milking borrowed cows. It is milking borrowed cows, and we must be on the lookout.
Very, very important for people to hear. Now, there's an article here I want to mention as well. This also goes along with this in reference to this conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And I want people to fully understand what he's trying to say here. This idea of African countries still having to depend on other foreign countries in order just to function or get things done, whether it's the food products that are coming in, etc. They need to break away from that, is what he's saying. They are usually, as the gentleman said in the other video, the forgotten continent. They're usually at the bottom. And I want to show you this article, which says just that. Listen to this. It says practical Pan-Africanism secures Africa's dignity. Let me go into this here. I'm going to make this bigger because the font is tiny. Okay, that's better. Boop. It is an incontestable fact that the world is undergoing major geostrategic shifts. One of the interesting aspects of these shifts has been the anxiety that is faced by the major global players, which validates the saying that when the big neighbor sneezes, everyone is likely to catch a cold. Africa's predisposition has been to stay as far away as possible lest it catches a cold. However, there is only so much that this approach can achieve. In this competition of geostrategy, the world is being redefined, which means that Africa itself is being redefined. In other words, it is radically significant process to which Africa cannot afford to stay indifferent. Europe, and to a lesser extent, America, anxiety has a lot to do with reordering of the world. It is a world in which the West is used to being on top of the food chain. And from the higher rung, it lectures others on what the rules and values are or should be and how to play them. This goes back to what the gentleman just said in the video. We are not in control. When he mentioned the digital currency, the cryptocurrency, he said, whose cryptocurrency? Whose digital currency? They don't own it. Let's go on here. Therefore, it is not surprising that in the process of redefining the world, the rules and values that govern it, Europe has been very aggressive. It is as if it fears that it could become the next Africa and finds itself at the bottom of the food chain. Why is this a problem for Europe? Well, Europe understands that it has had an overwhelming influence in defining the image of Africa, especially over the past half century. It knows full well the role it has played in misrepresenting Africans as a hopeless people without agency, a people whose life chances, are left to Western benevolence. This was evident in media coverage of the pandemic, as Europe battled with one of its worst health crises in decades. Even as the death toll worsened in its own backyard, Europe seemed to be preoccupied with the mystery of why aren't Africans dying? It is incomprehensible that Africans could perform better than Europeans in containing the effects of the pandemic. All kinds of analysis, including the advantage of poverty, a headline the BBC was forced to retract, were used to explain Africans' reluctance to conform to the image Europe had shaped for them and conform Europe's predictions of high death rates in Africa. Now, this is the key right here. Meanwhile, while African institutions had money, they could not find, we'll say medicines here, to buy because Western governments had hoarded them beyond what they needed for their people. Again, the Western media narrative had to weaponize benevolence by showcasing the donation of jabs that were near expiration or those that had already expired. Now we get into the point here about Ukraine. So in the present context of the war in Ukraine and ensuing food and energy crisis, Europe understands that its vulnerability invites others to define it just as it has done for Africa. Similarly, it understands that the ability to define others is a weapon to strip them of their dignity. It is therefore not surprising that Europe is the most nervous in the ongoing process to reshape the world as it fights to prevent itself from becoming another Africa. This part right here, let's highlight this. It is therefore not surprising that Europe is the most nervous in the ongoing process to reshape the world as it fights to prevent itself from becoming another Africa. Those who are nervous are susceptible to becoming aggressive. So has Europe. Times are changing. We have BRICS. We have countries that have come together that have decided not to pursue the US dollar anymore and to have their own currency. The power dynamic in the world is starting to shift to the point where a powerful country like the US is starting to lose some of its power. And some of these other countries are starting to work on their own. Now, it goes on to say, this time again, Western coverage of the war in Ukraine is repeatedly predicting the worst for Africa, not Europe, where the war is taking place. War is in Europe, but the victims are in Africa. I'm going to say this again one more time. War is in Europe, but the victims are in Africa. And this goes right back to the video, the first video that you saw in reference to this particular discussion, where they talk about the famine, where they talk about the food supply. They're not even involved, but they seem to be hit some of the hardest. The images of the catastrophic consequences of the war are the starving and hungry Africans, despite the greater effects of the war on Europe. Famine-fearing Africans dominate Western media coverage. This is so sad. This is crazy. This is so sad. Listen to this. In the media's war opposing the West and Russia around the food crisis in Europe, Europeans claimed that Putin was not allowing food to leave Ukraine, while Putin claimed that sanctions and mine passages were the reason the food remained in storage. So we got to go back to what we talked about earlier, the sanctions that the US government implemented on Russia. That prevents them from doing the trade. And that in turn will affect people in countries in Africa. It always seems to go right back to the US. So Africa's top leader, Macky Sall and Moussa Faki, were mobilized to pressure Putin, who, according to the Western media narrative, was threatening Africans with hunger. You see how this works? Russia was starving Africa. Sall apparently told Putin that Africa was at the mercy of the war in Ukraine, in other words, at Putin's mercy, while in fact, Europeans wanted to beg Putin for food. They couldn't imagine sacrificing their dignity in the process. How could self-respecting people line up to beg Putin for food? They must have asked themselves. So you see what they're saying here? The media is making it seem like that Russia is purposely starving people in countries in Africa and leaving out the fact that the food, those products can't move because of the sanctions. So I wanted to talk about this today because I feel like we've talked a lot about the war between Russia and Ukraine, and we've talked about its effects on European countries, but we also need to cover how it's affecting countries in Africa. And again, you can point your fingers back in a circle and it comes right back around to the United States, because if it wasn't for those sanctions, they would still be able to move those products to countries in Africa. So yet people in Africa, once again, could be seeing another famine. Crazy times we're living in, guys. This is why you have to push back against the mainstream media narrative, because they'll leave that piece out. But what people are complaining about in Africa is that it may be time that they cut their dependence on other foreign countries. And I'm here for it. Dwayne says on the West, not other countries. The West and the U.S. wants to keep Africa dependent and exploited. Thank you for the super chat, CC. Good work and good reporting. You put reporting the truth before your own opinion, and I so respect that, Sabby. Thank you so much. P says Gaddafi was going to mint his own money and unite Africa eventually with their own currency. Look what Hillary did to prevent that. Hard Lens, what's up, Kit? I encourage you all, when you have time, to check out Fall of Civilization podcast. All empires fall. That's right. And shout out to Indy Left, says hi, Sabby. What's up, Indy? I'll take that comment on there. There you go. Shout out to Roger Meadows for being a Sabby member for 1 month. So they got their own version of the Homestead Act. There you go. There you go. Go ahead and hit that like button if you haven't had a chance to do so, guys. That helps me with the algo. And we're going to get into this story. This story here about Joe Rogan's criticism of the DNC. Now, we have 2 critiques here from Joe Rogan. And then I want to talk about a panel that Case Study QB shared with some of these same critiques. You have to realize Joe Rogan's podcast is huge. So the amount of people that heard this message, especially since one of them happened during his interview with Pauly Shore. Pauly Shore is an actor, for those who didn't know. Millions of people heard this message. And I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Now, I want to start with this clip here on Fox News, where they're discussing the polling numbers, the Fox News polling numbers between Biden, RFK Jr., and Marianne Williamson. And they get into one of Joe Rogan's statements about the DNC. Listen to this.
As of now, the DNC has no plans to hold primary debates. Podcast host Joe Rogan, one of many to slam that decision. Let's watch.
How are we going to get a better Democrat if you don't let the president debate? So they won't let him debate because Robert Kennedy Jr. and what is that other woman's name? Marianne Williamson. Marianne Williamson, apparently they're both promising candidates for the Democratic Party, but they won't let him debate before the primaries. So it's like, that's not that democratic.
No, it's not. Not democratic at all, to Joe's point. And even if you don't believe in the process, I don't believe in putting progressives through the Democratic Party because, again, like DNC, like they argued that they're a private corporation. I'll show you something on that in a minute. But that's not democratic at all. Now I'm going to listen to this remarks here, and then we'll go to the next clip.
Joe Rogan couldn't remember her name. But look, you got a Kennedy in the race. I don't know that you ignore that, Congressman Murphy.
Well, first off, Donald Trump, the president, said he wasn't going to debate until the general as well in the primary. But so with all due respect to Joe Rogan, and there should be debates. But
wait a minute. Did you just call Donald Trump the president? No. He's former, and the current president won't debate. I mean, imagine when those two men, if they are the nominees, get together. I mean, at least Donald Trump is out on the trail. He's getting he's getting a workout right now with voters.
I think the point that he's trying to make, though, is that Donald Trump also had primary challengers and he wasn't willing to debate them either. I think that's the point that he's trying to make.
But Harris, he said he wasn't going to debate in the primary, in the Republican primary this cycle.
Okay, so you went to Trump instead of Biden, Mark.
No. Think about this.
Listen, sure.
So think about this. Robert F. Kennedy, other than having a famous name, is an absolute nobody. He's never held elective office. He's never.
So do you give him a pass? So
he's never held elective office. Neither did Donald Trump when he won in 2016. Like, people's statements are just weird.
Doesn't have to debate the president?
No, but my point is that
90%
he's a radical environmental activist who's never held elective office, and he's polling at 19%.
So because he's never held political office, because he's polling at 19%, because he's a so-called radical environmentalist, that means he shouldn't be able to debate? This is mainstream media here for you. This is what they try to do. They cover weight for the establishment. They protect the status quo. This guy is paid to do this. I don't care who he works for. He's paid to do it. He is paid to protect the status quo. That's why these people are on here.
19%. He has a larger percentage of the vote than every one of the Republican contenders except for Trump and DeSantis. I mean, what does that say about Joe Biden? Imagine if a real candidate got in the race and tried to challenge him. Look, Joe Biden is 68% of the country say he's too old to be president. They're right. He's going to get into a debate with Robert F. Kennedy, and then Kennedy's going to say, "What country were you in last week?" And he won't remember Ireland.
Oh, yeah. Can't even make that up. All right.
Yeah, so that's that part. It's just really where all these people are paid. And then I want to get to this piece that Joe Rogan said here in reference to the DNC. And he made some criticisms about who he really thinks is actually running the country. You got to hear this. Listen to this. Again, millions of people watch the show.
I think, it's really hard to run a country, and most people aren't very good at it. Just how it goes. There's very few people that are actually good at it, and it's very clear that this country is being run by a bunch of people other than just the president. I mean, I don't know how much say he has, but it's a lot of other people are involved, and they're not doing such a great job, and they haven't made course corrections very good. There's a lot of mistakes that have been made that didn't have to be made, and that's just how it is. It's just like it's not being run well. And so you have to go, well, who could do it better? Could it be a Republican, or it could be a better Democrat? And if it's not a better Democrat, like, how are we going to get a better Democrat if you don't let the president debate? So they won't let him debate because Robert Kennedy Jr. and what is that other woman's name? Marianne Williamson. Marianne Williamson, apparently they're both promising candidates for the Democratic Party, but they won't let him debate before the primaries.
Now, you heard that part, but listen to this part here at the beginning.
I think, it's really hard to run a country, and most people aren't very good at it. Just how it goes. There's very few people that are actually good at it, and it's very clear that this country is being run by a bunch of people other than just the president. I mean, I don't know how much say he has, but it's a lot of other people are involved, and they're not doing such a great job, and they haven't made.
Being run by other people other than the president, and I agree. They're called corporations. I agree 100%. They're called corporations. The DNC is a private corporation. This is not a public company. You see what I'm saying? It is a private corporation. Now, there was a panel here. Again, I was really excited that was said on Joe Rogan's show, just because millions of people watched that show. And I really wanted them to hear that message. Now, there's a panel here that Case Study QB was able to capture a soundbite from, where they talk about this issue with the DNC as well. Listen to this.
Well, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is, I believe, went from 10% to 21% in some polls. But here's the thing, though, Brian. Just like in 2016, the Democratic Party is trying to rig the election in favor of Joe Biden. We saw this before with Hillary Clinton. We're seeing it now with them not even wanting to take on certain primaries. The New York Times came out with a post recently where they talked about the frustration that black voters are feeling, the enthusiasm gap that black voters have, and how they feel that he's not kept most of his promises. Now, that comes on the heels of the 70% poll that came out with the NBC, which showed that 51% of Democrats didn't want to see him run again. I think if they have a candidate like Robert Kennedy Jr., who's able to get steam and money, that may make a difference. But of course, you got Democrats who are looking to rig the election in favor of Biden. But I think it doesn't look good for Joe Biden if there's a real candidate that steps in the race.
Did you all hear that? He made it very clear. He went back to 2016, back to 2016.
Well, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is, I believe, went from 10% to 21% in some polls. But here's the thing, though, Brian. Just like in 2016, the The Democratic Party is trying to rig the election in favor of Joe Biden. We saw this before with Hillary Clinton. We're seeing it now with them not even wanting to take on certain primaries. The New York Times came out with a post recently where they talked about the frustration that black voters are feeling, the enthusiasm gap that black voters have, and how they feel that he's not kept most of his promises. Now, that comes on the heels of the 70% poll that came out with the NBC, which showed that 51% of Democrats didn't want to see him run again. I think if they have a candidate like Robert Kennedy Jr., who's able to get steam and money, that may make a difference.
But of course, they are going to find ways to make sure that someone like that won't build momentum. And one of the ways that they'll do that is by smearing them. So I think it is very important that people understand how this is all going to play out and what the DNC actually is. And I want to show you this piece here, because some people are newer viewers and they may not be aware of this. We need to go back to the DNC fraud lawsuit. Now, Farouk tweeted this earlier. For those that still love the DNC, yes, the DNC treats voters unfairly, but since it is a private corporation, it can do so and also favor a candidate. The DNC believes that the primary election belongs to the people who control the DNC, not the voters. And here's this article here, and we've talked about this before. Nico House was on not too long ago because he was one of the people that first talked about the DNC lawsuit when it happened. And that was this: DNC to the court. We are a private corporation with no obligation to follow. No obligation to follow what? So I retweeted this and I said, just a reminder of the DNC fraud lawsuit. Yes, the DNC is a private corporation. So you need to see here, this post here from Steve Grumbine. He shared this with me. This is from DNC attorney Bruce Spiva. There is no such thing as a Democrat. The DNC just encourages people to vote for the Democratic Party. Let me say this again. There is no such thing as a Democrat. This is very important. This is coming from the DNC's attorney during the DNC fraud lawsuit. Let's go on. 2, no one has any right to an expectation of a fair election. I hope everybody is seeing this and pass this on to your friends, right? For the people who like, you got to get out there and vote. I hope you pass this on to your buds. If the DNC wishes to select a candidate in the primaries instead of a free election process, that is their right. And this is what happened with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, where Bernie Sanders won every county in West Virginia, and the superdelegates decided to give that state to Hillary Clinton anyway. They argued in court that they are allowed to do that because it is a private corporation. Let's go on. 3, donating money to Bernie Sanders doesn't mean you thought that money was going to assist him to win the primary. You guys see this? You have no right to think the DNC was obligated to follow their own charter and internal policies about elections. I'm not making this up, you guys. Not making this up. 4, discussion of or any disputes with the DNC do not belong in a transparent process in a court of law. The DNC is a private association which should never be asked to engage in the discovery process or have to reveal any of its internal workings or strategies should they decide to select a candidate rather than allow a fair election of a candidate. So they argued this in court, the DNC fraud lawsuit. They are not required to do what you think they're supposed to do. They are not required to be fair. It's a private organization. They're not required to give a state to the candidate that won the most counties in the state. The superdelegates are not required. They are still picking candidates in a back room. And this is what people have to understand. This is why I said in reference to RFK Jr., you got to take the gloves off. Like, you can't be nice. You have to go in there knowing that the DNC is going to cheat you and that they're not going to allow you to win. So you might as well go in and take the gloves off. Expose them for what they are. Expose them. But see, they can't tell you this. A lot of people don't talk about this. This was revealed. DNC fraud lawsuit. A lot of people don't talk about it because then that would discourage people from donating money to candidates. You see how this works? If you tell people about this, they're less likely to give these candidates money. And that's what it all comes back to. A lot of times, this is nothing but a money grab. The person is already selected. They know who they want. Someone who's going to protect the status quo, who's going to continue to support the military industrial complex, and someone who can convince the American people that they are on their side. Someone who can virtue signal the right way so they can get the African American voters. Democratic candidates cannot win without the African American vote. Period. So they need someone who can virtue signal really well. They need someone who is status quo, who will support the military industrial complex, and someone who will still back big pharma. And that's what this is all about. That's why I'm telling you, they were never going to let Bernie Sanders win. That's right, Boy for Love. Call them out. Call it all out. Call it all out. If I knew this was how it worked back then, I would have never donated money to Bernie Sanders. Not one dime. Not one dime. This game is already decided. Checkmate. So, people need to understand that. And someone should send this to Joe Rogan too, so he understands that this is all done. So instead of everybody trying to rally behind a candidate, what people should be doing is rallying behind some type of organization effort to change that. Some type of organization effort to change the way the DNC is allowed to operate. I'd be all for that. If you came to me and you said, let's get together and do this type of organizing to push back on the I'd be with you. But what I'm not going to do is be with you on this bandwagon of another candidate going through the Democratic Party when I already know what the party has already said that they are allowed to do legally in the court of law. Don't have time for that. Other than that, I hate to say it, but catch me outside with other organizing, with local organizing. Catch me doing that. Catch me with mutual aid efforts. Catch me with direct action. Catch me with ballot initiatives. Catch me with those kinds of things. But in reference to this with the Democratic Party, miss me with all of that. So that's important for people to see and for people to understand, because I don't think a lot of people know about that. I really don't. Crazy when you think about it, huh? I'm gonna make sure you share this with people. Go ahead and like the stream if you haven't had a chance to do so. Pass this on to more people because they need to see that. They need to see it. Let me go to some of the comments here. Dr. Nick says Kennedy has a good friend. His name is Joe Biden. Yeah, it's like, I would let all that go. I would let all of that go. You might as well go in and knock a couple of rounds out because they're going to cheat you. Casey says RFK Jr. is a Sanders. It's like goddamn deja vu for the fourth time since 1990, whatever. I like some of the things on his platform, but I think he should do this as an independent. I don't think he should do it through the Democratic Party. And if he is, then you got to take all the gloves off. Deneen says Biden is the commencement speaker for Howard University. Get your brain around that one. And I'm sure they will pump him up with what else, whatever they need to pump him up with so that he can get through the speech. Zombie says they would rather lose to Trump than do anything we want. Exactly. And that's probably what will happen. Probably what will happen. Oh, man. Okay. We do have, oh, thank you so much for that, Missy Kins. Oops, that's the wrong one. Thank you for that. You make a great case, Sabby. Yeah, I mean, this is what they argued in court. Nobody wants to talk about, they don't want to get into that. People just like, why not this person? Why not that person? And I'm like, why not change the system? You change the system, then you can talk about this person and that person. You don't change the system, there's no talking about no person. There's no way. Let's stop pretending these people are going to win. They're not going to win. And I think RK Jr., I think he has to know that. He has to know that. And it's not because of him. It's because of the DNC. So that's that. Now we're continuing on with our ballot measures discussion with New Mexico. So we've been going through states that passed ballot measures in November 2022 to tell you what has been done to encourage people to try to make change on the local level, because that is where more local, that is actually where more change can come about, right? We don't have super delegates. And this is direct democracy. This isn't the type of democracy that the DNC is referring to, where you have a representative and you hope that they do what they say they're going to do. Direct democracy involves ballot initiatives and ballot measures where you take it straight to the people. Now, in reference to New Mexico, citizens of New Mexico may repeal legislation via veto referendum. New Mexico does not feature the power of initiative. What the legislator places on the ballot through what's called a legislative referred constitutional amendment, aka state legislator initiative, is the only ratification process available to them. Laws are only passed by the government. So New Mexico is different from some of the other states that we've covered. So let's go on here. There are subject restrictions, general appropriation laws, laws providing for the preservation of the public peace, health, or safety, for the payment of the public debt or interest thereon, or the creation or funding of the same, except as in this Constitution otherwise provided, and for the maintenance of the public schools or state institutions and local or special laws. So you can file a veto referendum petition, can be filed against any law except for those that I mentioned. So you have to be careful there. Now, number of signatures required. In New Mexico, the number of signatures needed to place a veto referendum on the ballot is equal to 10% of the total number of votes cast in the previous general election. To suspend the law until voters address the veto referendum, signatures equal to 25% of the total number of votes cast in the previous general election are required. Below are the signature requirements that referendum proponents must meet to get their initiatives on the ballot in that year. So distribution requirements, signatures equal to a minimum of 10% of the votes cast at the last general election in each county must be collected from registered voters in each of 3/4 of the state's 33 counties, amounting to a 25 county distribution requirement. This distribution requirement applies to both referendum petitions that suspend the targeted law and those that do not. Who may sign? Those who sign the referendum petition must be qualified electors in the state of New Mexico. Now let's go ahead and get into, because I don't want to read, I don't go through all of this because it can be pretty lengthy. But let's get to the first one. This note here is important. Note, voters placed no veto referendums on the ballot in 2022. Passed. New Mexico Bond Question 1, Senior Citizens Facility Bond Issue, 2022. A yes vote supported authorizing the sale of issuance of over 24 million in bonds for senior citizen facility improvements. This measure passed by 66.33%. So that is interesting there. Unfortunately, I can't make this bigger, so bear with me. The 2022 Capital Projects General Obligation Bond Act authorizes the issuance and sale of senior citizen facility improvement, construction, and equipment acquisition bonds. Shall the state be authorized to issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $24,470,000? To make capital expenditures for certain senior citizens facility improvement, construction, and equipment acquisition projects, and provide for a general property tax imposition and levy for the payment of principal of interest on and expenses incurred in connection with the issuance of the bonds and the collection of the tax as permitted by law. So, what is the bond fund? Bond question 1 issued almost 24.5 million in bonds to make capital improvements for certain senior citizen facilities across the state. A general obligation bond is a public debt and is paid for through state funds, specifically funds from a statewide property tax in New Mexico. Who supported this? State Representative Christine Chandler. And who opposed it? Apparently no one. In reference to campaign finance money, there was no money spent to support it or to oppose it. So that's a good thing. There's no money spent to support it or oppose it. We're going to cover one more, and then I'm going to finish the rest on Tuesday evening. And that is number 2, New Mexico Bond Question 2, Public Libraries Bond Issue. A yes vote supported authorizing the sale of issuance of over 19 million in bonds for public library improvements. This measure passed by 62.71%. He goes on to say the 2022 Capital Projects General Obligation Bond Act authorizes the issuance and sale of library acquisition bonds. Shall the state be authorized to issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $19,260,000 to make capital expenditures for academic, public school, tribunal, and public library resource acquisitions, and provide for a general property tax imposition and levy for the payment of principal of interest on and expenses incurred in connection with the issuance of the bonds and the collection of the tax as permitted by law. What did the bond fund? Bond question 2 issued no more than over 19 million general obligation bonds for library improvements at public libraries, public school libraries, academic libraries, and tribal libraries statewide. A general obligation bond is public debt and is paid for through state funds, specifically funds for a statewide property tax in New Mexico. So who supported this? State Representative Christine Chandler. No one opposed it, and there was no money spent to support this or to oppose it. So that's a little bit about New Mexico. I will finish that up on Tuesday. But really quick, I do want to give you guys a special shout out because I did notice this earlier today. I just want to say thank you guys so much for the support. I'm officially at officially at 37.5K subs. Thank you guys so much. I'm getting closer to 40 there. I think I might be able to make it. I don't know how soon that'll happen, but I think I might be able to get there. And I want to thank you guys because all of your support. You helped me get there. A little bit of music celebration. Almost there. Oz thinks I can get to 50 by July. I don't think that's going to happen. We're already in May. I don't think it's going to happen. But a little bit of fun here. All right, I think I did that right. StreamYard has these little tunes that you can play, and I'm just trying to do some things over there. But celebrate good times, people. 37.5K. We're almost at 40. Let's do the damn thing. This means something is happening right. I'm doing something right. I hope so. And it is what it is at this point. Gonna go to a couple comments and then I'm gonna head out. And I hope you have a great Sunday evening. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Catch me outside with my BI, my ballot initiative. New Mexico and Maryland only veto referendum state. Thank you so much for that, Roger. And thank you for the super sticker, 118 Debbie. Thank you so much. Yeah, buddy. Let's rock out. Party like a rock star. I wish I could play that on here, but I can't because of the copyright, you know. I'm surfing cowabunga totally, dude. All right, guys, I'm heading out. Have a good evening. I'm off tomorrow. I'll be back Tuesday evening. And other than that, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.